live in 2 minutes. Lynn Cullen live in 1 minute. Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live at pghcitypaper.com. Email your questions and comments to lynn at pghcitypaper.com.
Hello, and welcome to a dreary Tuesday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the 23rd of the second month of the year 2016. My sister sits in a more hospitable climate, although I understand she's under the weather. How was that for all this meteorological stuff? Hi, Susan.
Hi.
Hi. You don't sound so.
Hey. No, I just have this stupid cold, which I don't understand how I got sitting in the sun on our patio.
Well, you're smarter than that. You know you got it by having your hand touch the wrong railing or something. I mean, that's just... Yeah, you didn't win the lottery, that's all.
I know.
I'm sorry, Suze. Well...
It's okay.
Yeah, there are worse things.
It'll go away eventually.
Yes, indeedy. So, I have to read to you. You're the one who told me about this, but I just came upon my first journalistic rendition of it from The Guardian. And the journalists in the UK often have this wonderfully understated, snarky style. So here we go. This harkens back to Susan's former hometown of St. Louis, Missouri, which generally only gets in the news for bad things, right? Here it is.
Yeah.
Spare a thought.
Like they have to try.
Yeah, here we go. I'm just going to do the first 2 little paragraphs. Spare a thought for the Catholics of St. Louis, Missouri, weighed down as they are with ponderous spiritual matters. On top of such weighty issues as the Pope's recent call for an end to the death penalty, which is a popular pastime in Missouri, they must now wrestle with a new moral conundrum. Thin mints. The ethical dilemma is put pithily on the website of the Archdiocese of St. Louis under the headline, "Can I still buy Girl Scout cookies?" The equally punchy answer states, quote, "Each person must act in accord with their conscience," end quote. All right, Susan, the thing is, you guys, that diocese must be a piece of work. I mean, you got rid of that horror.
This is the new liberal guy.
He ain't. Jeez. That's what I'm saying. You guys got rid of that horror of a archbishop or whatever he was. And and then the Pope, Francis, really demoted him, right? Knocked him into some stupid little
first
position.
He was, as usual, by Benedict, he was promoted
to Rome,
and
right?
To Rome, where he became the grand poobah on all things as conservative as you can get. He was one of the guys behind, trying to get the American nuns, rebuked.
He was put in charge. You're right, of sort of political correctness, religious correctness in the Vatican under Benedict. And when Francis got in, and he said some nasty thing about Francis, didn't he?
He kept picking fights with Francis. So Francis disappeared him once.
Yeah.
But they could still hear him. He was still,
still yapping,
sending out nasty arguing to his infallible Pope, and so he got banished even further. He's barely a muffle anymore.
Right,
instead we get this Carlson, who's supposed to be a good guy in St. Louis, and then he effing bans the Girl Scouts.
Well, he doesn't.
The Girl Scouts.
He says the new, more liberal head of the St. Louis diocese really believes that the Girl Scouts are supporting a lot of and promoting a lot of bad things for girls. He calls it troubling behavior, and it's clear to me as they move in the ways of the world, it is becoming increasingly incompatible with our Catholic values. So there go the Thin Mints and Do-si-dos.
And you know that this is all about sexuality. This is
of course it's about.
Girl Scouts
right.
Publicly stating that any girl is welcome as a Girl Scout. And they aren't going to be looking at your underwear to see, whether they think you're a girl or not.
Well, it also has to do with just general feminism, because he's saying that they hold up Gloria Steinem as a role model.
Right. And Betty Friedan, he mentioned them both by name.
Right. And listen to this. He says, and these terrible Girl Scouts forge partnerships, these are his words, with human rights groups.
Like
such as International, like Amnesty International. This is an Archbishop of St. Louis who says that the Girl Scouts are... What the... Jeez. All right. I just wanted to share that with people because I hadn't, you told me about it, but then
I don't know.
It's not getting a lot of press.
What's so unchristian about Amnesty International? I mean, aren't they the sort of ethical watchdog of the globe?
Yeah, but they're sort of lefty. They're sort of lefty.
Because ethics is sort of lefty.
I don't know. The Archbishop does not order an immediate severing of ties with the Girl Scouts and their cookies, but he does urge each pastor to consider ejecting them from the property.
Well, a lot of these troops meet in churches.
Yeah, sure,
so,
I know.
Yeah.
Well, all right, well.
There's been, as usual, your typical uproar in St. Louis among St. Louis Catholics that are getting so tired of it.
Well, I would think that the Catholic community there must, by virtue of these leaders they've had, and because St. Louis is, by nature, an extremely conservative town, I would imagine the Catholic community there is excessively conservative. I mean, I'm just thinking of your own in-laws.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's conservative.
Yep.
So, well, I hope they don't have a hankering for Girl Scout cookies, because I think if they look at their own conscience, they just can't do it. Can't do it. Okay, so that was that. So, Sue's the Supreme Court met yesterday, and since first time since Scalia's demise, and according to the New York Times, they were, they started out by saying how miserable they were, and then they went into acrimonious dispute as they listened to oral arguments.
Right, they divided themselves right up.
Right up, 4-4. That's what we got. Well, 4-3 with Kennedy, sort of. But yeah, Sotomayor went after Alito. It was just apparently people who were watching and who know the dynamics were saying, ay. Oh boy, here we go. By the way, 2 Republican senators have now come out and said they think Obama should have a shot at picking the next justice.
Well,
so that's a little what?
One of them is Kirk from Illinois, and I think he knows politically in Illinois he's got to do that.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, they're just saying they're not saying I'm going to vote for the person. They're saying we need to have saying
a hearing is
right.
appropriate, necessary. Right.
Right.
And constitutionally required even.
Yes, indeed. And since Scalia was such a originalist, and it's right there in black and white in the Constitution, it doesn't say anything about if a president is in his final year in office, he shall not appoint. It doesn't say anything like that. So Scalia himself would clearly... he wouldn't, because even though he was supposedly the strict originalist, when it came to politics, he often forgot his principles, I would say. I mean, it's been documented that he thought the First Amendment was the most important amendment because freedom of speech to him was the most important. And yet, if you look at his record, it's only when the speech... when the speech was liberal or off that end, he didn't always think the First Amendment was, was such a great idea. He was all for protecting, conservative speech and corporate speech, a la, a la speech is money. Also, it's been said that Scalia, and this was in the Times today, that Scalia loved Bob Dylan and often used Dylan lyrics in his dissents, usually. And then it turns out someone started looking around, and Dylan is cited in so many judicial rulings because, I mean, there's always some pithy line from a Dylan song that sort of sums up a case, right?
If you say so.
Well, here, I'll give you one. The most cited Dylan lyric is from Subterranean Homesick Blues, and it's used a lot when judges want to reject expert testimony. And then they simply say, hey, you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows, right? So that apparently, to know which way the wind blows, that apparently is there all the time. Also, Justice Scalia apparently, the day after the Supreme Court did the gay rights ruling, apparently sang a song to Justice Ginsburg. And it was "The Times They Are A-Changin'." Also, here's a consumer fraud case. A judge in a New York court said that the claimant is merely offering the Bob Dylan plea, "It ain't me, babe." So, God. And the Court of Appeals of California, regarding the Civil Rights Act of 1964, said in a ruling, it was in this time that Bob Dylan warned, Come, senators, congressmen, please heed the call. Don't stand in the doorway. Don't block up the hall. And then what's funny is they do the cite just like they would if it were from a legal.
Right. Of course.
So it says, Bob Dylan, The Times They Are A-Changin' on The Times They Are A-Changin', Sony Music Entertainment, Columbia Records, 1964.
Well, actually, they're required by law to do that.
Okay. And here's another.
Those are copyrighted lyrics.
Here's another. Right. And this was... Well, I'll just read from the decision. The following lyrics, which place an individual's status in the universe in context, could easily apply to the legal universe. You may be a state trooper. You might be a young Turk. You may be the head of some big TV network. You may be rich or poor. You may be blind or lame. You may be living in another country under another name, but you're gonna have to serve somebody. Yes, you are. God! So, that's pretty neat. Jeez.
It is.
And I forget which justice said something about, you don't have, I think it was Scalia, you don't have to like the music, but the poetry. The poetry.
Well, I like the music, too.
I do, too.
Necessarily like him
he didn't have a good voice. And another one that's used a lot, and I think Justice Roberts used this one, is when you got nothing to lose. He was saying that it's easy for a plaintiff to come, you can see where these lyrics really do, right?
Yeah.
And it says other fields as well. Here's something funny. In medical papers, a study last year found Dylan references 213 different published medical papers, one of which was called Nitric Oxide and Inflammation. Wait. Listen, there's a subtitle. Wait. Nitric oxide and inflammation. The answer is blowing in the wind.
Blowing in the wind, right.
All right. So, Suze.
Yeah, how are you adjusting back to Eastern time?
I think I'm there. It's so much easier adjusting heading east than it is west. It's just a joke. Really. Go east, young man. It's just easier, and the trip is easier because you got the wind at your back. So, it's actually a shorter flight by quite a bit often, instead of battling those headwinds. And with El Nino this year, I guess those headwinds are pretty intense. So, Suze, you got to come back.
I know. I am. I'm coming back. Like next week, you'll talk to me in
Chicago.
St. Louis. No, yeah. Where do I live? Chicago. I told you.
You don't know where.
Idea. I don't know where I live.
I said you're like a Bedouin. You're
right.
Yeah.
Because I feel essentially homeless, but that turns out not to be a bad thing because then I'm at home wherever I am.
Mm. Well, and that's a nice home you're in right now, and it's a nice home in Chicago. You do not, however, have a home in St. Louis anymore. I just want to point that out.
No, I don't. I sold it.
Yeah.
Just in time.
Just in time. I saw you
just quote a lyric. Right.
Yeah. Okay, so, Suze, Donald Trump is going to be the nominee.
It looks like it, doesn't it?
Well, I have a caller.
That thing that we just couldn't imagine.
Yeah,
okay,
I have Mike in D.C., our gentleman caller, says it's Rubio, and how that the establishment is going to figure out a way to knock him off. But I don't see it. And do you know what? They're saying that he might take Texas from Cruz.
Wow.
He's also leading Kasich in Ohio. I mean, if the polls are to be believed, it's just sort of like a steamroller, and the more he wins, the more, a lot of sort of the kind of spineless souls who aren't sure they know which way to, they just, they jump on board.
Yeah, I was shamelessly eavesdropping on the conversation of my neighbors yesterday, where they were sitting discussing presidential politics.
Oh, dear, I heard some conversations of theirs, too. Oy.
Well, right.
Yeah.
Right. Not so great. But
no.
It turns out the gentleman neighbor is a Trump supporter.
I don't doubt it for a minute.
But the women that were seated with him were clearly moderate Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were talking about how they were upset with the way Obama was treated, that there needed to be respect for the office, even if you didn't like the man, that they felt that people didn't really know what the Constitution said and they needed to take civics lessons. And then this guy explains why he's for Trump, and he's for Trump because he finds all of the rest of them so despicable he can't even think about them. And Trump, after all, is a successful businessman, and he's smart, and he'd rather have a smart guy. And I'm thinking to myself, except you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. But that's how they're getting. That's how a lot of people are getting to Trump, I think.
Well, it's this American belief that if you're rich,
that you had to do something.
That you had to be somehow brilliant, and because
instead of the fact that this is a guy that's that simply has so much money that he can cushion all of his bad decisions. So forget about how many times he's declared bankruptcy. Forget about how many times that his deal making is of the nature of, I got you, and I don't ever have to do business with you again. I'll find some other schmuck to do business with the next time. I mean, they aren't examining anything except for his, net worth.
Right. And that appears to be inflated, too.
Right.
Yeah. No, he has... I don't know. If you start looking at... And they say that, eventually the way you run against him is by telling these people that think he's salt of the earth all of a sudden how many people's livelihoods he has destroyed by virtue of all these bankruptcies.
Right.
I mean, think of one casino, one of his Trump casino goes down. How many lives did that impact?
Whose hands do we think he was holding in his Atlantic City casino businesses? I mean, I don't know about most people, but I just make the assumption that if you aren't a casino owned by an Indian tribe, somewhere in there is organized crime.
Well,
I mean,
probably.
Gambling is just an organized crime business. It's like trash hauling in New Jersey. There's just some things
that
are openly controlled.
Well, but there's a lot of the money that impacts the Republican Party is casino money. I'll give you Sheldon Adelson out there in Nevada.
Yep.
Who, by the way, I didn't read the article because I just can't take too much of this anymore, has not, I thought he was supporting one of the other or coming out for maybe Rubio, but no, he's still holding his...
He's being pretty quiet. It's interesting.
Well, he probably just really can't stand any of them. I don't know. Or people are starting to get nervous in the establishment that Trump is going to do it, so they're trying now to sort of curry favor with him, so that you have this McCarthy who took Paul Ryan's position as, what is that position? It's not.
Yeah, what is it?
It's whatever underneath House Speaker.
Whip?
Maybe the whip, yes. That McCarthy has said, I can work with Donald Trump. And someone else, some other senator said, well, yes, I can. I mean, they're starting to say that. I can work with Donald Trump. Oh, dear. So, anyway, we'll find out. What a year. I want to get to Hillary, though, because, Susan, there was this, I thought, really fascinating piece in the Sunday Times. Maybe you read it, about why young women aren't jumping on the Hillary bandwagon. Did you by any chance read it?
I didn't read it all, no.
No, okay. Excuse me, but I shall share some of it with you. I mean, it's really smart, and it's written by a woman who's 32 years old. So she says, I'm sort of right in between these younger 20-somethings and the 40-pluses who love Hillary, and then the young ones who just say, what, because she's a woman and I'm supposed to vote for her, or what is... So I think it's a really smart piece, and I do want to share it with you and my audience a little bit. For one thing, she says, you know, the reality is that a young woman, a woman who's 23, 27, has grown up in an entirely different environment than a woman my age or your age. From the day they were born, they just have a totally different life experience, and that's because of the feminist movement. That all of a sudden daughters were valued and daughters were told they could be anything they want to be. That wasn't what we were told.
No, I was told to go to college and get C's.
I had no idea what I was supposed to do. I mean, I think it was a given that you were supposed to go to college to get a husband.
Right.
That was all.
That I shouldn't stress myself. Right.
No, definitely don't. And the only jobs available were secretary, teacher, nurse. Correct me if I'm wrong, librarian. I mean, it was so limited. And when I first got to college and told I had to pick a major, or was supposed to pick a major, because I had no ability to think outside of what a woman was, I decided I would major in education. I had no desire whatsoever to teach. But I thought that seemed like the only thing that college was offering that I could do. I certainly wasn't going to be a nurse, because I'm squeamish. So, I mean, so there's totally different realities. And she points out that a young woman in her 20s, college educated, they don't see a huge pay gap between what they're getting and their male counterparts are getting. They're all getting screwed, right? None of them are making much of anything. Right. Nope. And in fact, in the early to mid-20s, women make 97 cents for every dollar the guys make. So they're still getting a little more screwed. But what young women don't realize is that in their 30s, that gap starts to widen. By their 40s, it's really widening. Because when women's earnings peak between the age of 35 and 44, and it's downhill from then, and men's income continues to rise. So she's saying that older women have experienced this sexism and this institutional sexism much, much more so than anyone by virtue of just their age of 20. And when you experience it throughout your life, it radicalizes you and might make you say something like, anyone who doesn't...
There's a special place in hell for women that don't support other women.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and then this woman, and you've regaled us with stories of your own, this woman talks about, the experience of that she had in her 20s and now early 30s. She said, a dozen years ago, I mean, it can be a rude awakening when you finally get to where you thought you wanted to be. And she says, as a young lawyer, one of the first things I noticed about department meetings at my law firm was not just the dearth of female partners, but that one of the few female partners always seemed to be in charge of ordering lunch. It's little
Shame on her.
No, but it's little things like that. And she said, and I saw that as older white male partners who mentored the younger white male associates, they were able to work long days and excel professionally precisely because they had stay-at-home wives that were taking care of everything else in their lives. She said, I saw virtually none of the female partners having that kind of support. So this is what drives I think a lot of professional women have been heard to say, all I want is a wife.
Absolutely.
Meaning someone to take care of everything so I can excel at work. But women now are doing all of it. Anyway, here I thought was a brilliant remark. The work world and the world at large remains a place that is built by men for men. And that is part of what makes Hillary Clinton's candidacy so compelling to a lot of women of a certain age. Here is one who says, I pray to God that one day we can field a female Bernie Sanders candidate, some disheveled lady yelling, and the country will seriously consider her. But nothing in our culture indicates to me that that is even remotely possible.
Perfect.
Ain't that it?
Perfect. There was also today, I think in the New York Times, a report of a study done about auctions on eBay, and
yes.
that women get less money than men do for the same product. It's
true.
It's a totally blind study.
It's true.
So I mean,
what does that mean? So if a man puts the
bias is so ingrained
that you'll pay more if
even among women.
Yeah.
Because women pay women less too. It's not, it's a universal cultural phenomenon that you just don't pay a woman as much.
And women don't realize they do that. So if a man and a woman put the same lamp up on eBay,
brand new,
the man gets
brand new, unused.
Yeah,
more.
The man, people pay more for the guy's lamp. That's how ingrained it is. Which brings me, Susan.
And I do think the most important thing to point out is it's across the board.
Yeah.
It's women doing it to women, and
right.
On the
sure.
same frequency that men do it to women.
Right.
So, just like all oppressed people, we play a role in our own oppression.
Right.
And part of what you're saying is that we've got to convince a whole group of ourselves that there is such a thing. They don't believe it.
Well, listen to this, okay? This is today's New York Times. Men spend more time working for money. Women in this country and throughout the world do the bulk of the work that is deemed to be
for free.
Absolutely no pay at all. Stop and think what would happen. I think this is Mom's story. Mom has that wonderful story about what Dad said when she said something to him about if she would die before him
first.
What would he do? since he was helpless without her. I mean, he could make a great living, but he couldn't open a can, right? So what would
Couldn't find the dishwasher.
Right. What would he do without her? And his answer, he mulled it for a second. She's never forgotten his answer. I'd hire a staff, he said. He wasn't kidding. He said, I'll get someone to cook. I'll get someone to clean. I'll get someone to run my errands. She'd already raised his children. I mean, what? Why is the work that absolutely has to be done given no value at all? It's women's work. Same reason this is the eBay thing, too. It's so ingrained throughout the globe that if a woman's doing it, it's not a value, and yet invariably it is the most valuable work.
Well, I used to say, when people wanted to know whether I still practice law, that, that I had no time because, frankly, it took two people to live my husband's life.
That's right. That's right. You were.
And it was true.
That's right. It was. And he acknowledged that. He was an extraordinarily successful man. But he could devote all of that intelligence and energy he had to his work, to his success professionally, because he did literally not have to worry about anything back home, right? So if you think women, and I don't care how different it is, and young men today do more, that is true, but the numbers, guys, are still totally out of whack. Totally out of whack. You know who's getting behind an effort to get acknowledgement of this? And I'm glad to see it. Melinda Gates. It's her number one priority. She says she calls it time poverty. That women's work. Worldwide, I mean, people who crunch the numbers, women spend an average of 4.5 hours a day doing necessary work that is given no monetary remuneration at all. Men, not so much. They do, some, like an hour or two. In this country, they think, it says throughout the world, men spend significantly more time on leisure activities, which include sports, watching TV, and hanging out. While the women...
No, yeah.
Well,
I do see a lot of difference among young men and how they are.
I think, Susan, among educated men, young men of a certain more liberal persuasion, I think. You can't look at your son and even his friends and say that's the way it is, because it's not. That's not playing out in a lot of...
No, I know.
Right?
I know.
The worst countries...
But it exists.
I got to tell you, the worst countries where men do absolutely nothing and women do all the work and don't get a penny for it, India, top of the list.
Of course.
India, Mexico, Turkey, Japan. Now, the best countries, big shocker here, huh? Scandinavia. Also generally considered the best places to live, the happiest people, blah, 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 right? So the stats for this country is women spend about 4 hours a day on unpaid work, all taken together, compared with 2.5 for men. So, that's not as huge a gap as you see in a lot of places. But it starts at the beginning. American girls are given more chores than their brothers. And often the boys are paid for their work and the girls are just expected to do it. Here's what Melinda Gates says. We need to call work what it is. Work! whether you do it at home or whether you do it out in the labor force, and then give men and women options to choose what they want to do. Unpaid work must be recognized, it must be reduced, and it must be redistributed. I think it needs to be paid.
Yeah, it must be. I think it should be monetized.
Yeah, it doesn't show up when we do when the economists crunch their numbers and decide what our gross national product is or talk about productivity in America. They discount all the stuff that women do. Think of what it is: the raising of children, the purchasing and preparing of food.
Excuse me. Let me point out, they only discount it if it is a woman doing it in her own home. If you monetize it, for example, a daycare person, that's counted.
If it's a job,
a housekeeper that comes in.
No.
But if it is the woman's own home,
no, I'm talking about
the work.
Right, but that's how it mostly happens.
Yeah, I understand.
I understand. If it's a job, if somebody gets a paycheck, that counts. But I'm talking about all the stuff, all the volunteer organizations that rely on women's labor and smarts and organization that raise millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars for various causes and charities. None of that makes its way.
Wait a minute. More insidious is the fact that we condition women to be more comfortable with doing high-class work for free. And I'll use myself as a perfect example.
Yeah, well, you are the perfect example.
I'm perfectly happy to use all of my expertise on any number of boards and do all sorts of legal work for free. I only get unhappy when I'm required to be paid for it. So I think that has a lot to do with my social conditioning.
Well, it might. It might also be a slight psychological quirk or something.
I might be nuts, yes.
Yes,
I
think.
Is definitely.
A little of that. Because I was raised in the same environment you were, and I like to get paid.
I know. Eric used to just look at me and shake his head.
Thinking of all the money you could be bringing in.
Thinking of all of all the billable hours that I just insisted on giving away.
Yeah, but he wouldn't have eaten as well. He wouldn't have had as much, support. He wouldn't have had whatever. Okay, can I just read then the last part of this? I think this wonderful, who I don't even know what her name is, woman who wrote this thing, trying to understand the difference between young women just totally not into Hillary, and then the older women with their life experience informing.
Go for it.
Okay, here it is. She says, at 32, I'm right at the sweet spot between older millennial and uninteresting adult. Enough years on the planet to qualify as a grown-up, but still no house, no mortgage, no marriage, no children, but a job I like, a law degree, and a large pile of student loan debt that comes with it. Most of that is the result of specifically feminist achievements unthinkable a century ago. And here's what I want people to remember. What the feminist movement, the relatively new one, the one I was a part of, I'm not dead yet, what we saw, the way we grew up. She says, she got an open door to college and to law school. That was not true of women in the 40s or 50s.
No, I was,
right?
or excuse me, 70s.
70s, all the way up.
One of seven in law school class.
Really? You're one of seven? Wow.
One of seven.
Okay.
This is relatively
Okay, so
new.
It is new. So everything I'm going to say, do you remember, I bet, Celine, do you even know that a woman could get a bank account in her own name?
Until when?
Well, I couldn't. You had to have no, see, this is new. So this woman has done some research, and she says, a bank account and credit card in my own name. I had that with no question. We couldn't early on. Can't give a woman credit.
when our father died, our mother had no credit.
That's correct. Okay, easy access to birth control. When I was of childbearing age, birth control was still illegal in a number of states. Birth control was illegal. And if you weren't married, lots of luck in getting any.
A woman needed her husband's permission to get her tubes tied.
Right. And as I said, to get a bank account,
Right.
to get a checking account, to get a credit card. This is what we saw as reality and then lived through the breaking down of these barriers, which now it seems like, you're kidding me. It was like that? Yeah. And we weren't wearing high-button shoes. And she says, this was a culture in which women, there was never any expectation that a woman would be anything other than a wife and a mother. And she says, even my own resentment at the sexism I've experienced can be articulated, can be described with specific terms because of the decades of feminist activism. When I was subjected, and you were subjected, to outrageous sexual harassment in the workplace and other places, we didn't even have a term the idea of sexual harassment did not exist. You just took it. My early days in television, one can't even begin to imagine I've told these stories. The first day on the job, opening the drawer in my desk that I'd been given with all the guys in the newsroom watching me, there was a used condom in there. That's not something the way you dealt with it was just, whatever. There were no words. Which is why I get a little freaked at how, that all the political correctness now and the way it seems like feminism for a lot of young women now is just about sexuality. It's just so much more. So much more. Anyway, this wonderful 32-year-old that wrote this says, these are just huge successes. The world is a better place for women who graduate from college today than it was when Hillary Rodham graduated from college. She graduated into an entirely different world. Perhaps someday this better world we've made will even create room for another feminist victory, a female president.
It would be nice.
I think it'd be important. And even if it's in the imperfect vessel of Hillary Clinton. So, I'm going to, I don't have to love her, but...
no, my support is really pretty rock solid for her.
Well, it is. And I can see just the way things are. Bernie can't win. He ain't going to do it. So I got to go with her. And it's not like an abdication of everything. The fact is she is more competent than anyone in the race on either side. She's just totally uncharismatic and comes with a slightly sleazy aspect because of how well known, and Bill, and because of how well known they are, because they've been in the spotlight for so long. So anyway, I got some emails to catch up on here, Suze. Okay. Ed writes about superdelegates. For whenever you might want to talk about superdelegates again, do you know about this? Oh, sorry. That's just something for me to read later. Sorry. Superdelegates are an outrage. I just want to say they are an outrage, and they are, totally sticking the finger on the scale. It's a totally undemocratic thing that the Democratic Party came up with to keep them from having another George McGovern. And it's working, because Bernie Sanders would be a George McGovern in all likelihood, and they're going to keep him from getting the nomination. Maybe. He probably wouldn't have anyway, but whatever. Joe Ellen writes to Mike in D.C., who thinks Rubio's going to have it. I would agree with Mike about Rubio, except for one thing. The Republican establishment created the ideal conditions for Fox News and the Tea Party, but they have now lost control. I agree. They've lost control. It's Frankenstein's monster. Sorry.
Right.
They lost control. Something wonderful about it.
Well, they thought they could control their own bullies, and they can't.
Well, they also were
just a party of bullies at this point. That's it.
But they've also spent decades now re-educating, misleading, and creating certain ideas in people's heads about about hating government, about hating media, and they didn't think it would end up where the people that they were telling the government was horrible and the media could not be trusted, that they never realized they're the government. I mean, what were they thinking? Idiots. You know, it was weird on this, so that story about Melinda Gates wanting to make a big issue about how women are doing all this work and getting no value. It is not valued at all, even though it is the most important work in the world. And it's given no monetary value at all. And then that was on page 3 of the New York Times. And then when you turn the page to 4, on the very opposite page is a story about women in the Gaza Strip riding
bikes.
Yes. Did you read that?
Yeah, I read that.
Oh my God. You have to be a very courageous woman in Gaza if you want to ride a bike. And that's true throughout much of the Arab world.
Right. And this isn't something that was always true. This was something that
it wasn't always true.
Around the 80s.
Right.
That suddenly women were not allowed
right.
to, because men might see their bottoms.
Yes, it says
on the seat,
Palestinian.
Or a flash of their legs.
That's right. Palestinians frown at the idea of women bicycling because men might inappropriately leer at their legs moving up and down or ogle their bottoms. This is why women have to be clothed, because men might have a lustful thought. Women
and we
must
all
be.
know that men can control themselves. Oh.
No, and this is also like Orthodox Judaism, and you look at women in totally paternalistic, subjugated cultures, and it's always the same. The woman has to be constrained so that men won't go nuts, I guess, won't run amok. And listen to what one of these women says. Here's a quote from one of the women who's gutsy enough to ride. She says, and she's riding with, full, you can't see a dang thing. She says, riding a bike makes you feel like you are flying. I feel free. And it talks about these guys looking at them ride by, and they're hooting at them and hollering. And here's one guy. One guy says, they're detestable. It's ugly. The role of our women is to obey their husbands and prepare food for them inside the house.
And this guy is what? I think he was 33.
He's 33.
Yeah.
And then an older one, you see, Susan's right.
An
older man had no problem with it. 53-year-old, because it didn't used to be like this. This is how he said. Abdul Salam Husseini said, "So what if a woman rides a bike? People have reached the moon already." This is when the Israelis gave Gaza back. This used to be Israel, where they're riding their bikes. So Israel said, okay, fine, here, have it. You can have Gaza, take it. And the idea was that they would then have democratic elections. And they elected Hamas. And that's when Hamas brought all this crap down on the women. Decade-long rule of Hamas has been accompanied by initiatives to restrict women from participating in sports, riding bicycles, all this kind of craziness.
Well, and I think it's very interesting that men make these rules and basically say, we've decided that the women are our slaves. And guess what? The rest of the men think that's a fine idea.
Sure. What about the women, though? I
think they need to rise up and murder their men in their beds.
I don't think that's a bad idea. And one of the girls in the story says, oh, my God, if I were to ride a bike, my husband would beat me.
Right.
Right? And she's laughing when she says it. Like, he beats me all the time, but, he'd beat me. This is women's lives.
I know people always think I'm being very dramatic when I point out how recently we have made our gains and how easily we can slip back.
Right.
And if you want to know how easy it is, ask that woman on that bicycle in Gaza.
Yeah. Or ask all the women, Susan, the women in Iran. That was such a cosmopolitan place.
Right.
Ask the women in Afghanistan who are university professors. Ask if you think
you can't lose it all.
You can't lose it, then yeah. Start electing, it can happen here too, and there's a huge force in this country. We'll go back to the Archbishop of St. Louis being part of it. A huge force to stick women back. And the backlash against these very recent, the last 40 years, okay? These recent gains by women. I have my own credit card. I don't have to get my husband's permission to do this. I remember something where my husband had to come and argue something. Well, that was about getting into the... But yeah, you were not considered a full... You just weren't.
No. And the minute you got married, you became your husband's chattel. You had to seek permission for a lot of things. It was very strange.
Yeah. 'Tis all true. So like that. So that's why Madeleine Albright, that's why Gloria Steinem lose it on occasion. Because they're still standing, and they know what they accomplished. They know how hard it was. And you can't expect somebody who didn't go through it to appreciate that. You can never expect that. Ever.
No, but no, you can't. But when these women are stopping, turning around and holding out their hands and saying, let us help you get where you're going, and these women basically spit on their shoes and say, we don't need you. I do wish that people knew a little bit more about how precarious their position really was.
Well, I think this is one of those just human nature things where people are doomed to go through these circular repetitions. So there is, abortion now, the right to abortion is very precarious because you just can't, it's there, but you can't get it. You can't access it.
You can't access it.
So, I don't know. And that's like one of the more basic. Does a woman have control, have dominion over her own body? Well, there's an awful lot of human beings in this country who say no. And there's an awful lot of politicians and an entire political party that says no. A woman does not have dominion over her body. Although men do.
Men do. Well, or, and we can go back to the church and this whole thing about contraception and Francis saying, that it's okay to use contraception. Yeah,
because of Zika.
But, it's not the first time that's happened. When they sent nuns to do missionary work in places where they might very well get raped, and they knew it, those nuns were allowed to be on contraception.
Ain't that nice? Oh, since you're all being raped, we'll let you have contraception. The idea of a nun being, Susan, it's.
Can you imagine the policy decisions about these things? These groups of men that decide
sitting around
that this group of women can be protected from pregnancy, but a wife cannot be in control of her body with her husband.
Oh. It's something.
Well, she can abstain, I guess.
Maybe.
But I don't think.
No.
Maybe.
Well, maybe. Wow. Hey, by the way, there was something in the Wall Street Journal before we go, because our time's up, that I've always known this. I like to sleep in a room that is cold, 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 and it says here, best temperature for sleep. Well, they've decided it's 65 degrees. I think it's a little cooler than that. I think it's about 60.
65.
All right, I think it's a little less than that. But they say 65 is the ideal temperature. Also, it's a good idea to wear socks on a cold night, because if your feet are warm, it does keep the rest of your body warm. And do not sleep in a warm room. You will not sleep well because your brain needs to cool down.
The brain rests best when it's cool. And, there's a whole bunch of stuff. That's the new thing for hair loss, too, especially during chemotherapy. They put cold caps on the head, and that keeps the hair from falling out. It's the heat in your head that does these things. And they've said for years, for insomnia, wear a cold hat. Same thing. It quiets the brain.
See? I'm telling you, open the window, even in the winter, bundle up, and stick your head out, or at least your nose. And it works. It works. Oh, you sleep so well.
You do, and you're just so cuddled in a warm bed.
I love it. All right, Suze. Well, I hope that whatever that is goes away.
Me too, because, it can't go much lower.
Oh, yes, it could. Say hi to your friend there.
I will.
Say hi to Mom.
Okay.
Okay, and feel well. Better.
Okay, thank you.
All
I
right.
actually don't feel as bad as I sound.
Okay.
Okay.
See ya. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. All right, you guys, that was today's rendition, and I don't know about you, but I'm going to be back tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper, Steel City Media, and its advertisers.